Good day, my name is Scott Kinney with Discovery Education, and it is my pleasure today to be joined by Keith Krueger, the CEO of the Consortium of School Networking, better known to many people as CoSN for our One Idea series. So Keith, welcome this morning.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be with you.
I know Keith is a frequent face in the educational technology industry. In fact, recent congratulations, I think, go out to Keith as being named one of Tech and Learning's Digital 10. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's nice to have that.
So one of the things that I don't think you can get away from right now, every morning when I open up eSchool News or District Administration, there are articles around this topic of data and student privacy. And so, Keith, could you help us at a high-level frame what the conversation is currently across the educational landscape?
Yeah, and I think it actually is a society conversation. Really, privacy is not completely new at all in the education. Obviously, the longest-standing federal law, FERPA, dates back to the mid-1970s, so there have been concerns about privacy. But the last 2 years, there's really been a societal new conversation, obviously sparked by the National Security Agency and the hacking of credit cards like at Target, and specifically in the education area around the data platform in Bloom, which was launched with the help of the Gates and Carnegie foundations, with a with a big boom at South by Southwest a year and a half ago, and they could not answer the questions around privacy to the satisfaction of policymakers and the public, and really were shuttered down. So I think that this is migrating. We've certainly seen that conversation moving in state legislatures. There's lots of action here in Washington. We're seeing the Elementary and Secondary Act is under consideration here, and there are certainly concerns that are bubbling up, whether those things get resolved or not. But we're seeing that things are starting to migrate down all the way to the local community and into school districts and school board meetings and PTA meetings. And I just saw 2 weeks ago a new survey of parents, and the number one concern of parents, 78% agreeing they were concerned about how data was being used about their children. That's really a very new development. For the last 20 years, the big concern of parents has been internet safety, and that those concerns haven't gone away, but they've been eclipsed in some ways by the privacy. I like to say privacy is the new black, as they would say on Project Runway.
Is there, I want to get to the parent communication piece because I think that's critical, as you pointed out. Has the landscape fundamentally changed? I mean, 20 years ago when I was in a school, we talked a lot about data-driven decision-making, and we talked a lot about those elements. Is it fundamentally changing now, or is it being noticed more now?
I think what's being noticed is the way in which data is collected and disseminated. And so cloud computing obviously is one big driver. The other big driver are mobile and apps. And so data is no longer stored down the hallway like it was 30 years ago in the principal's office. It's no longer stored on servers in the school district, but increasingly it's available in cloud computing via the web. And as increasingly, there are these apps which teachers or students download on their mobile. There, in fact, may be additional data that they're accepting free apps, which the reason that it's usually free is there's some business behind it that the data is somehow useful to that business.
Sure. So I'm a school administrator, maybe a superintendent or a cabinet level administrator. What should I know today about this topic? And then I want to get to what should I do with that as far as my community and my parents are concerned.
Yeah, I think there are kind of three buckets of issues. The first is you have to comply with federal laws. And a lot of our audience, we represent kind of the technology folks. And they have very few school districts have a chief privacy officer. So increasingly, our folks who run the technology are being asked to make sure that the way in which the data is done is protected by their service providers. So you have to understand what those federal laws do, and I can talk a little later about some of the resources that CoSN and others have created to help school leaders do that. But to be very honest, if you're just complying, if you're just checking boxes, that doesn't really instill confidence, especially by parents and policymakers. So you really, I think, have to be thinking about what are the best or what we would call aspirational practices. And that's challenged because we have many small districts, very few districts, even large ones, have large technology staffs to or professional development efforts. So we really have to up our game, I think, in terms of aspirational practice. But even if you're complying and even if you're doing aspirational practices, the third bucket is really, I think, around communication. And even if you're doing the first two, if you don't do the third, you can get in big trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the communication. I mean, that I would imagine that's a pretty broad stakeholder group that you need to create that strategy around.
Yeah, it really is. And I think part of it is a lot of school districts have started with the mindset of, we don't really want to talk about this. Or the way in which communication happens to parents is often as part of like an acceptable use policy, which is semi-legal language. Maybe it gets sent back in a student handbook at the beginning of the year to parents after they read five pages of legalese, right, and they're supposed to sign something. Well, that's just like when you download a software and click, you probably don't read it, and it rather than giving you assurance, it probably raises concerns about what you're actually accepting. So we really think that school districts need to be much more transparent and clear. First of all, why are we collecting the data? Why is it important for education? And clearly, we probably don't need to collect data that we don't need for that purposes. We need to clarify, I think, to the public that there are fundamental beliefs that school districts have. And the good news is last fall, CoSN, along with the Data Quality Campaign, gathered together all of the national education groups. And we put them in a room and we closed the door and said, is there any commonality about what we believe around data? And the interesting thing was, at the end of the day, this was kind of counterintuitive given all the controversy that there is around privacy. There was widespread consensus about why we collect data, how we should protect it, and what we shouldn't do or should do with it. And what that led to were 10 principles. They're called student data principles. If you go to studentdataprinciples.org, you can read them. And actually 39 national organizations have signed on. And by that I mean the PTA, the teachers' unions, the school boards, the principals, the state chiefs. To my knowledge, over the last 30 years, I can't think of another controversial education issue where everyone has kind of come to agreement at a high level. Now, that's not to say that there's acceptance in every single detail of how we handle data, but at least in conveying to parents and the public, there actually is consensus around why we need data, how we should use it, and what we shouldn't do.
So, Keith, you're a national leader on this topic. Your organization certainly leads a number of efforts to help schools through this. You talked about the resources. Where do I find out more about these topics?
Yeah, so at CoSN, CoSN.org/privacy. For that first area of compliance, we've partnered with Harvard Law School. The Berkman Center there we've created a free toolkit which talks about FERPA as well as COPA, which applies more to companies. What questions should you ask? So there's all kinds of really useful things like, what should you have in a contract? What questions about security should you be asking your vendors? We've also put out like 10 things that every school district should be doing. Those start with, number one, make sure, everyone's responsible around data, there should be someone who's identified as the lead. It may not be their full-time job, but someone should be overseeing the whole process. If no one's in charge, if everyone's in charge, no one's in charge. We've also created, in terms of communication, last fall, as part of the Back to School, we partnered with the School Public Relations Association, NISPRA, and created an infographic. This is a very simple thing, but as you're communicating with parents, can we talk about in a clear and parent-friendly language, why do we need this data, and how are we protecting it? And so that's downloadable, and it's customizable, and it's also in English or English and Spanish. So you can add a cover message from a principal from the school, and to be very honest, the message should come from as close to the parent as possible, from the school level, we think, to add confidence. And maybe you add a fourth page which talks about what applications, what vendors are you using, what and where do you get, if you have questions or concerns, who do you contact? That's real simple, but it's done. And the big thing that we're real excited about, we've just received support from the Gates Foundation and the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. We're convening about 28 school districts, and we're going to create, we hope, if there's consensus, a seal. Which we're going to call the Trusted Learning Environment Seal, so that parents and the community would have some confidence if a school district chooses to become certified at that seal. So stay tuned. That's kind of a coming soon.
A little teaser there at the end. Well, Keith, this is our One Idea series. Keith Krueger is the CEO of CoSN. Keith, thanks for your leadership in this area, your organization's leadership, and sharing that wealth of information. And most importantly, thanks for what you do for kids every day. Appreciate
Thanks,
your
Scott.
time.
Thanks so much for all that Discovery does, too.
Take care, Keith.
Take care. Bye now.